on the Isle of Man, we're uniquely placed that we actually have a third-party right of appeal, which gives people the opportunity to challenge planning applications or planning decisions that have gone through, and that's actually quite a differentiator from other jurisdictions. So in the UK, once a planning consent is granted, then objectors don't have any right to appeal to that. So it's a really important and valued part of the Manx planning landscape. And of course, you get planning appeals from both objectors who are dissatisfied with a decision to grant approval, and equally from an applicant who has had their application refused and wishes to challenge that. And I think it is important that there is effectively an appeal process.
With respect to the sort of reasons behind this change, it was quite cynically put, to borrow the word, that it was a bit of an increase in revenue for the department and a reduction in workload. What would the department's view be on the reasons for the alteration?
Well, the key thing is the economics of the of handling appeals, and the costs are substantial. So appeals can be handled either in written form or by an oral hearing. In written form, the inspector's fees alone are £276 without taking into account any costs of officer time, and for oral hearings, the day rate is £338 a day, and typically we're around about £1,000 a case. And again, that's purely in the out-of-pocket fees paid to the inspector, notwithstanding the hours of officer time that are involved. So it's recovering. The department is looking to recover costs it's incurring and being financially responsible as we should be in terms of looking after taxpayers' money.
So is this a cost profile which has changed substantially, or is it a case of maybe it's something the department's been making a loss on previously, or which is true, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's symptomatic of departments looking harder at every aspect of the cost base. I mean, we've got the Save initiative, which looked at the big ticket items and came forward with various projects there. But departments have to challenge all aspects of the cost base, and where you're effectively subsidising a service like this, where you're either subsidising an applicant to appeal, or you're subsidising an objector to appeal against an application that's been granted. When you look at it like that, to try and recover a better proportion of your costs is good, sensible financial management. And the other point I would make is that if an applicant, if an appellant is successful in their appeal, then they get those costs back. So the only people who end up actually paying this fee and not recovering it are those who actually run an appeal and then lose. Now, the process has been gone through once already, so they've had representations, they've had a determination either by planning committee or by officers under delegated powers, and they're coming back and challenging that decision. If their appeal is upheld, they get the money back. If it's not upheld, then they don't. And I think that's pretty fair, to be honest.
But it's a flat rate, isn't it? There's no progressive cost structure as such, so the differentiation was made by Mr. Pass between private individuals seeking an appeal and maybe larger firms or developers, etc. So I suppose the fear is that these private individuals are being priced out of that process.
Well, it is a flat fee, and it's the same for whoever is appealing. I think it would be very difficult to have a fair system that differentiated with a different amount of fee for depending on who you were. I mean, it's £276 if you're confident in your in your case and you expect to win it, then you're going to get it back. There's nothing to stop people clubbing together if there's a number of people objecting to an application, and equally, if it's an applicant who's been turned down who's then appealing, then £276 is probably a pretty modest element of the cost of their development. And it's useful to contextualise that actually the vast majority of these appeals are actually applicants who've been turned down rather than third parties. So we're actually talking about people having another go through the system where the taxpayer is effectively not recovering the full cost, but all the benefit obviously is for them. So we need to recognise that context. It isn't just about third parties appealing. That's actually the minority of cases.
To quote from Mr. Pass, he said that once upon a time there were no fees for these sorts of procedures, and I think his point was that it was a crafty attempt, in his words, to cut out the ordinary people. I suppose it's a deterrent from people to appeal decisions if they are having to put up. It's £101 more to a lot of people. That's a large sum of money, isn't it?
Well, I think it's an amount of money that you need to properly think about before you go and incur it. And we've got to look at it from the other side as well. That if you're appealing, then and if it's an applicant who's had a consent, effectively you're asking them, or you're preventing them from moving forward with their development for probably a 6-month period. By the time that's typically the timescales now that these appeals take to be determined, possibly a little bit less, but certainly several months. So an applicant who's successfully got a positive decision from their planning application is then having to wait whilst somebody else challenges it. And I think that's fine as long as it's a solid grounds for appeal. But actually, if you've got interested person status, you can appeal, and if you're prepared to spend the money, you can actually just do that, and actually has adverse consequences for the applicant. So I think it's right that it should be an amount of money that has to be thought about, particularly when the net cost of it is well in excess of the fee. So actually, the taxpayer is having to foot the balance of the bill. And I think Mr. Pass's comments hark back to perhaps a time when the island's finances were in better shape. We've absolutely got to look after taxpayers' money in a very responsible way. And I understand the sort of outpouring from some of these people, but actually I think it's good, responsible housekeeping. And the other thing is, we're not talking a huge number of appeals. I've been through the figures over the last 4 years. We're typically between 60 and 80 appeals in a year out of 1,400 plan applications. That's the typical run rate. So you're talking 6 or 7% of plan applications actually being determined at appeal. So it's a pretty small amount. And when we also put into that the fact that 2/3 of those are actually applicants appealing against a refusal rather than a third party appealing against against a consent being granted, then we're actually talking a pretty small number of third party appeals here.
Just finally, a bit of clarification, if you would. This kind of no procedure versus negative procedure thing, is this something we're going to see discussed in Tynwald?
My understanding is that it is a negative procedure, and the way that works is that any Tynwald member can actually bring forward a motion that the order not be granted, and then that would then be debated. So it's a process which applies in quite routine matters.
So we might not have seen the back of this yet. Basically.
Well, you may not have done. I mean, there has been some lobbying going on, and it's within the rights of Tynwald members to bring it back. It would then be debated and a decision made. So we'll see where that one goes.